Welcome everyone to How Automation Powers Data Quality and Governance at Scale. Today we have the pleasure of being joined by our wonderful partners at IMGS. Gavin's joining as a presenter today, as well as Donald on our Safe Software team here. Why don't I'll pass it over to each of you to briefly introduce yourselves. So starting off with Donald.
Yeah, I'm Donald. I have been with Safe Software coming up 2 years now. I'm on the technical support specialist team on the FME form side.
Amazing.
I'm Gavin. I'm CTO for IMGS, though I've been using FME for far too many years. I did work it out the other day, and it's quite scary. But it's been with IMGS now for 7, I think, years now. But it's around, all my career has been around data management, data governance, and helping customers use FME to manage a lot of their data challenges and a lot of their data problems.
Awesome. Yeah, super excited to have you joining us today, Gavin, as our guest speaker. Just briefly here before we dive into today's content, a few pointers with the platform. If you do have any audio or video issues, you can click that help button on the bottom left. It has a few simple steps to take there. Share your emoji reactions with us as we go along. We love to see those. They really fuel us and let us know how everyone is engaging with the content as we go. And then, great, everyone's already testing that out. We do have the chat tab, which everyone's already been using, letting us know where you're tuning in from, or you can share any comments or ideas in there as we go through the webinar. The questions tab. So if you have any questions at all for Donald or Gavin as we go through, please do drop those in the questions tab. We should have some time remaining at the end to answer some live. We might be able to get to some as we go as well. If you'd like to download the slides, you'll see a button on the top right of the PDF that you can click as well. All right, so at this point, I will prompt our presenters if we can turn off our webcam so we can save on some bandwidth for the remainder here. And I'm going to take us through a quick overview of our agenda before handing things over to Donald. So our webinar is going to be kicking off with Donald taking us through a bit of a topic overview and also an overview of FME if you are newer to the platform. And then from there, we'll be passing things over to Gavin, who's going to introduce IMGS as our partner, as well as the challenge that is being faced by organizations today surrounding this topic. And then as he discusses data quality and governance in more detail, he'll be walking you through a handful of various demos in FME so that you can see how to apply these principles firsthand, as well as he'll be highlighting some key transformers that you can make use of as he goes along. And then as we wrap up today, we'll be sharing some resources that you can make use of as you get started with this topic, as well as next steps. And then we will have that question period. I'll pass things over to Donald for our intro.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So before I hand it off to Gavin, I'm going to do a quick intro to today's topic, as well as an overview of FME for anyone unfamiliar. So when talking about both data quality and data governance, it's important to understand what exactly these represent. Data quality is about how good your data is. It focuses on things like accuracy, completeness, consistency, and timeliness, essentially whether the data is fit for purpose and can be trusted for analysis, reporting, or decision-making. And then data governance is about how data is managed. It's the processes, policies, roles, and standards that ensure data is handled securely and consistently across an organization. So this slide really sums up what today is all about. Most organizations are dealing with messy, disconnected data coming from lots of different systems. What we'll look at today is how automation helps turn that data into something you can actually trust with quality and governance built in, and how we do this consistently and at a scale. So if that's what we mean by data governance, the question is, why does this actually matter? At a practical level, good governance and data quality build trust in the data people are using to make decisions. They reduce risk from errors, duplications, or outdated information, and they give you a better visibility into where data comes from and how it's been transformed. So just as importantly, governance supports compliance and accountability, and automation is what makes all of this possible at scale without relying on manual checks or one-off processes. Quickly go over the FME platform. So this slide is really the big picture of FME. So at a high level, FME is all about helping you move, transform, and use data. It's any data, anywhere, and doing that reliably at scale. We're the only all data, any AI platform. So on the left, we have FME Form. This is the authoring environment. It's where you actually build your data integration workflows. So if you ever use ETL tools or model builders, this is the place where you connect to your data, apply transformations, and design how everything flows. Once those workflows are built, that's where FME Flow comes in, shown in the middle. FME Flow brings those workflows to life. It handles automation, scheduling, triggers, notifications, APIs, and all the operational side of running FME in production. So one important thing to call out here is that we offer flexible deployment options. So FME Flow can be deployed on premises in your private cloud, or if you don't want to manage infrastructure, we also offer FME Flow hosted, which is a fully managed deployment running in AWS. Then on the right, we have FME Realize. This is about experience your data in real world context. Things like augmented reality, 3D, and visualizing assets in the field in real time. So altogether, Form is where you build, Flow is where you automate, and Realize is where you experience the results, all as part of one integrated platform. So we originally started out very focused on GIS and geospatial data, and it is still a big part of who we are. But over the years, as customers' needs evolved, FME evolved with them. So today, FME supports 500 types. Yeah, that's over 500 data types spanning GIS, CAD, databases, cloud. And we also go into emerging areas like 3D, point clouds, and AI. The goal is simple: to help you make your data, to help you use your data where, when, and how it's needed, regardless of its source or format. That was just a quick introduction. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Gavin.
Right, thank you, Donald. That was great. I was going to say, it's amazing how many formats that FME has picked up over the years. I can remember when there was a handful on that graph, and yeah, it's just exploded. It's become so powerful. So IMGS Data Builders is the Irish partner, as you've probably guessed from all the sort of Irish accents, even if mine's slightly suspect. We've been working with customers across Ireland during that time with FME to help them understand how they can use FME, how they can better build out their workflows. And you can see there, we've got that strap line. We build simple solutions for complex data challenges. And obviously underpinning all of that has always been data quality and data standards and data governance, because that's really what drives a lot of solutions as we go through. So yeah, I think with data management, data government, that whole thing of moving to digital transformation is still being quite elusive for people. And I think the results there, showing that everybody's still struggling with that as well. And you're definitely not alone, because I think they're saying report there that says 60% of businesses think they're behind in the digital transformation pathway. 47% know they have data integrity issues, and there's 55% are looking at data accessibility issues. I know we've still got customers who are using pen and paper processes, still using fax machines. They're trying to move forwards in the digital transformation. They're quite happy to move digitally, but they're just trying to move through this process, understand how they can improve that data, move off these systems. And when we talk about AI and how wonderful AI is going to be, I think we sometimes lose track of the fact that there's still a huge amount of these data challenges that underpin that. And until we start to resolve some of those challenges and some of the data quality issues, the governance, it doesn't matter how fancy an AI platform you have or how shiny your dashboard and information is, you're still going to struggle with a lot of these things to actually get good output and good decisions from those platforms, because data quality really is the bedrock. And bad data is going to cost you time and money. I'm sure most people here are familiar with trying to sort out poor data, the amount of time that goes into it. You can get people with different data sets. like it says there, you can try and merge them together, you can average them out, you can do what you want, but if the data's wrong, you're still going to get the wrong answer out at the end of the process. It does take a lot of time and effort to get good data. So that brings us to the whole data quality issue. And as we're saying, it's that bedrock of good governance. If you don't have good data, you're not going to have good governance practices to go with it. You're going to be building on quicksand, your AI platforms, your reporting, your dashboarding, all of that exciting stuff that people like to see is not going to work in the way that you want it to work or the way that people expect the output to come from it. And you can end up making bad decisions based on bad data. So there are a number of ways you can look to improve your data quality. Obviously, we've got things like integration, so we can use FME to integrate different data sets. So classic being, if you think of addressing, an organization might have multiple different address databases. Some of those will have more records than others. Some might have more information for individual records. So we can bring all of those together, and you can start to actually come up with that kind of single source of truth for your output. We can also start to quantify a lot of the data. So it's all right to say, okay, we've got data. We know that data is maybe a little bit suspect in places, but can we actually put some numbers against that? Can we look at it and say, well, okay, we know we can make decisions on this data for certain things, but for other categories, we know that data is not as good. We don't have that level of completeness there. So, how do we start to understand that? And we can use FME to start to actually generate a lot of those reports for us, to actually be able to generate some sort of data quality statements to say, yes, we know we've got content here, but actually, if you're building a dashboard on this one, maybe be more cautious about looking at these fields here, because that's where we know we've got gaps in our data. And we can say that our data is maybe only 70% complete in that particular area. And again, we can look at cleansing the data. And again, FME has a lot of solutions for that. There's a lot of transformers which we'll touch on. And ideally, you want to automate all of this, because at the end of the day, you don't really want to be manually running workspaces all of the time, manually tweaking things. You want this to be an automated process that you can run through. So that's where we get into these sort of data health reports. So we can use FME to generate these data health reports, and there's a number of different output formats that we can sort of push those out to. FME's got fantastic tools for correcting the data. If you've looked at the geometry validator transformer, for example, some really, really good capability within there to actually start to not only flag data up, but it can fix it. You can use some of the other transformers to repair those data sets. You can make automatic corrections. Again, you may feel that automatically fixing your data is not good. And there's a lot of use cases where actually automating fixes can actually be quite dangerous, because you can introduce more problems. So you just flag that up. You can put that into your health reports. You can output that data. You can send it back to a data steward to say, look, we've identified these issues with our data. We don't want to fix them here, but we want you to fix them at source so they've been fixed correctly there at that start point. And again, we can start to work towards our single source of truth. And again, we can monitor it, because data is constantly changing. There are very few data sets that are static. A lot of the time, data is being constantly updated, worked with. So you want to continuously monitor that. You want to have that as a complete process. And again, when new data comes in, if there are problems, you want to be flagging that up, with the alerting side of things. So data quality being very much, a team sport. It's not just you consuming that data, it's the people generating it. How can you work together to actually start to solve some of the challenges that people face? And again, we mentioned reporting. So, things like Word, Excel, and email are very classic use cases for this. We have a lot of customers who will generate email reports. As they're doing data loads and bringing data in, they'll have quite a lot of information around what's worked, what's not worked as part of that. But we are increasingly seeing customers move towards systems where they're actually doing more of a dashboard. So that can be Power BI, it can be Sisense, it can be your dashboarding tooling of choice. We can build out these data quality dashboards so you can see across either an organizational level or a business unit, what does your data look like? Is it improving? Is it getting worse? You can start to measure that. So they can be really, really powerful, and FME can drive that kind of reporting. And quite often those sort of dashboards are what will get more management buy-in, because they can look at some nice shiny widgets, go, oh, hang on, that data doesn't look great. We need to improve that. And you can start to build the business case to actually deliver some resourcing for quality. And FME is very powerful. We can look across the spatial element of data. We can look at all the attributes. We can look at the schema. So whether you're using a Non-spatial data set, a spatial data set, it doesn't really matter. We can build the rules and the flexibility for all of them. And FME's real strength is in that spatial as well. It's the only real platform that can look at spatial data, generate these kind of quality reports, and do so to a really robust standard, and then tie that into all of your attributes and all of your schema kind of analysis that you want to do as you go through as part of this. Then, so we touched on some of the transformers. So if we're looking from a non-spatial point of view, the attribute validator transformer is a fantastic one for going through and starting to look at, putting your business rules into your data. So if you're ingesting data from a supplier, is it actually meeting what we want it to? If I'm about to output a data set, does my data meet what I'm expecting it to be when I try and write that data out? We can check to make sure we've got values. We can start to check that we've got the right data types in our data to actually match the specification that we're going to write to. We can look for our latitude and longitude. So, is the data, for example, sitting in Ireland as a latitude and longitude? If I have records that are 90 degrees of latitude, I'm basically going to talk to Father Christmas. It's going to be so far out that we're not actually in the right location. So therefore, we're going to flag those ones up straight away to say, well, hang on, we can only really be within that sort of range between about 50 to 60 degrees for those sorts of things. Similarly for null, remember when SAFE first were actually introducing this, and they were laughing, saying they spent a lot of time working on nothing. And it's actually quite a key point, because null is actually quite a difficult concept, and it can be represented in many different ways. And that transformer really lets us start to break down all those different categories to look for something that's just defined as being empty. Is it actually null, as in a database would recognize it as being null? Or is it just set to a particular value? We can encode all of those as well as we go through. So if we've got a particular value we want to use, or a particular date timestamp, for example, that represents null, we can encode that there and make sure our data matches to it and clean it up as part of that process. And again, you've got your classic duplicate filters to remove all your duplicate data that comes through, geometry filters to make sure we've got points, lines, polygons where we're expecting them to come through. And the new geometry filter has just had a new bunch of rules put in, so you can actually target different systems, which is really, really useful, because, even though data quality might be a standard, and there's an OGC kind of standard that sits behind it, it doesn't necessarily mean that Oracle, Microsoft, Esri, and everybody have all interpreted the standard in the same way. So you can start to run into challenges then between different systems looking at different types of data quality. So that's a really, really useful addition that's gone in. So some other key transformers, we're looking at things like the statistics calculator. We can pull back and actually start to do a bit of a data dictionary type thing. And that'll come important, as we'll see shortly, in terms of just being able to tell us what data we've got, what volume of data have we got. Have we got random records that we think that aren't actually part of our data, or maybe shouldn't be in there? We can start to look at the schema. We've got the schema scanner. We have the schema option from the feature reader, etc. We can really start to break down and look into our data and start to understand what we're getting through in a little bit more detail. So if I just have a look at this one. So initially we can use the schema scanner. We can run through, we've got things like the name, the title there, but we can run that through and we'll actually get the schema feature coming out from this, and that's going to start to break down and tell us what data we've got. So, if I'm reading from an existing database source, I probably know that I could look at the database table. But if I'm reading from something like a CSV, it may not be as obvious. If I'm coming from an Excel, again, it's not always obvious. Data, web services, increasingly a lot of data comes from web services. I might want to start to understand what that schema is going to be coming through. And one of the other key things we can do as well is look at the difference in schema. So a lot of the time, if you've got users submitting data against a platform, especially if we're automating processes, I want to make sure that the data that's coming in is going to match what I'm expecting. So we can use the schema scanners to check to say, okay, this is what my official record should look like. This is what the data is that has been supplied. If I compare the two, do the two line up? And if they don't line up, then I'm going to reject that data set straight away, because there is no point me bringing that data in if it's not to the right standard, it's not to the set of attributes that we're actually expecting for our data. So we're just going to reject that straight up. And again, saves all that processing downstream. We haven't got to do any additional work. And often if we tie this into a portal type approach, we can ensure that the user actually sees the error report and they can fix it, and they can do that automatically themselves. So say if we just jump onto that next slide, we can see that we've been working with a lot of customers on these sort of stewardship apps, the stewardship portals, where you can get customers either to have their contractors supply data in or other parts of the business. So you have other business units generating data, you need to supply those through. So we can put them in, build an app for them. They can upload that data set. They can have a button if it's more of a database type of transfer where you can just click in there and say, right, go off, pull that from that particular system, validate it against all the business rules. Does it meet what we're expecting? Is it the right standards, the right quality, and so on? And then we can generate an output report there, like on the left-hand side. So in this case, it's a nice HTML report. Gives a lot of flexibility about the styling. We can add in some charting. We can put in a little map if it's a spatial element, and we can start to actually report how much data is meeting the standards that we're needing. And we've got something we can feed back to say, look, we're rejecting your data because of this. You need to go and fix these criteria because it's not meeting the specifications that we need. And so data quality ensures accuracy. Data governance is really managing the policy and the processes that sit behind it. So in terms of the data governance, that's kind of where we're defining it as being a series of processes, policies, and standards, and ensure that the effective, secure management of data across an organization. And I think it's key things like data availability, the usability, the integrity of your data, and the security that become quite key to a lot of these things. And again, FME can help us with that as we go through. And the reason a lot of this is required is that if you've got poor lineage to your data and you don't really know where fields have come from, you're just building a dashboard against a table and hoping it's all right, you're going to end up with poor data insights. We've got a lot of things, obviously, with things like GDPR in Europe around data protection and making sure that our data is secure. If we've got personal information, that's protected. We're not just sharing that out. And there's big fines and financial penalties against that one. So that's always a good way of getting people to focus on these things. But how do we identify that information? How do we know certain fields contain it? And if you have a name field and a first name, last name, telephone number, they're fairly easy to work out in your data. But quite often we'll come across fields where maybe it's a comment field, it's a bit more of a free text field, and somebody's put in, oh, this is such and such's phone number. You need to contact them because their mother's sick, and then they're the number to actually talk to. Again, if we don't properly protect that information is going to get leaked out potentially. We're potentially looking at some serious fines from the relevant government department. And again, we want to derive value from our data. So the more we can bring data together, the more that becomes valuable rather than just being the sum of its individual parts. So having data integrated is really, really powerful. FME is very, very good at it, but it can be challenging if we don't know if the data underneath it is actually going to be correct and fit for purpose as it goes through. So if you kind of think about a typical organization, you probably start to recognize different users within this, possibly yourselves when you're looking at these different things. You've got your data analysts who are trying to work out, is it column A, column B? And we face this one quite a lot internally when we're looking at data sets. We're building something for a customer. You're looking at all the tables and it's like, am I picking the right table from this one? Am I getting the wrong table or column for this? It can be quite challenging. Data scientists looking at kind of, are there policies on how I can use the data? Can I use these particular fields? Are they going to be good? If I'm a data engineer, how am I documenting all of this? And these are the kind of things that people hate doing. Documentation is always a challenge as it comes through. So traditionally, and I've spent the last 20 something years, talking about metadata. People have always been very excited about metadata. Nobody does it. Everybody hates metadata. It's the one thing that everybody likes these portals to do things, but it's a real challenge. And I've picked the example here because this is a really, really good set of metadata. Somebody spent a lot of time bringing this all together, making sure it's complete, keeping it up to date. It's got nice kind of currency things on it, but you can see there it's got 4 views. Now, admittedly, probably salmon habitats in Dundalk is not the most exciting set of data to talk about, but people aren't getting a lot of traction on these things. So people aren't really using these sort of metadata portals. And lots of government organizations have built them. They're very, very good, Data.gov.ie is built on the CCAN system. FME has a great connector for it. You can plug straight in, so we can automate the workflows, automate the metadata publication, come up with some really, really good solutions. But it kind of doesn't really go anywhere. Doesn't ever get that traction with users. People who are building a dashboard aren't going to search for your metadata record to find these things. So it can be quite challenging to come through. And I say, yeah, metadata, can't say it's ever been an exciting thing. I've never met anybody who really enjoys creating metadata, to be honest. So we work with a company called DataGalaxy. They have a product named DataGalaxy, unsurprisingly. And it's really supposed to be the industry's first data knowledge catalog. It's an example of what you can do with this. It's not really limited to this. You can do this with any kind of platform. It's more about the process and how we can use FME to derive the information. So they have a combination of governance 1.0, and also they're trying to get people to move to this kind of governance 2.0. And if you look along the bottom there, you can see that we've got data has no knowledge reference. Is it localized? Is it defined and classified? Is it governance rules? Is it life cycled? And organizations do some of this. And you'll find different organizations can do things better than others. Certain departments will do this better than others. Other data sets are defined better than others. But we never really move up that data culture process. It still becomes quite siloed bits of information. So we might understand a little bit of data, but across an organization, we're not sharing that information out very effectively. So it's kind of how do we start to then share some of these things out? How do we start to make it easier for users to do this? So the classic way, is quite often you'd have like a business glossary, a data dictionary, your catalog processing, etc., to start to generate these, so you can visualize this data in a little bit more context. So there's another little video here that just takes you through the platform. And it's not a huge thing about saying, oh, this is the tool to use for these things, but it's trying to understand how that we can start to really socialize out the glossary. How do we start to generate the data dictionaries for these things? So we have an application here called Fixit that we've worked with Dublin City Council on. We can start to put in some of the glossary terms for that. We can put in tagging against it. We can put in some PII classifications there, and you can start to drill into it. It's really, really powerful. We can start to come in and create like the data dictionaries that goes with this alongside it. We've also got something like the glossary and things there, and we can start to build out some of the use cases through some diagrammatic elements to it as well. But it's still a challenge to actually start to populate all of this information. So whilst it's kind of quite a robust tool, it's still a lot of work to actually come through and do all that background data management. How do I capture all my glossary? How do I go and scan all my data sets? And that's very much where I say, if we just jump onto the next one. Thank you much. We'll have a look at FME coming in, and FME really does start to build out that process. So we can start to understand how can we use FME to actually generate it. And it really is that kind of knight in shining armor with a lot of these things, because rather than you having to come through, find all the individual bits of data, try and record that, we just use FME. And it's what it's really, really good at. So I say, if we've got next little video here, that's just taking a very simple one. So this is our address database for Ireland. It's called GeoDirectory. This is just a little sample snapshot of it. It's got lots of different tables, lots of attributes. It's very much exactly what you would expect from an addressing system. We've got the platform here. So we've got a glossary, we've got our dictionary. But what we can do is generate our sort of CSV outputs from this that we can then upload into that system to populate it. But we can do that using FME. So we can go and get FME to read our source data there on the left, bring that in, explode out our schema, look and separate out what's going to be a container. So, is it an Oracle database? Is it coming from a SQL reader? Look for the different structures, which is the tables. And obviously then we get the fields from underneath it. And we get all that information, there in a click of a button very, very quickly. And then somebody pointed out, well, hang on, this has an API. So why are we generating the CSV? We can just automate this completely. So we can come through, we can call the API system here. We can push in a record. In this case, it's just a simple glossary record. We can load that one in. Again, straight to the API, and it's populated it. Then along the bottom there, we're looking at obviously the data. So exactly the same process we've just done, but this time we're just calling a couple of different API calls to automatically populate the data. So we're just using the strengths of FME to actually start to generate all of that information for us. And obviously we're pushing that up into DataGalaxy so we can share that around with all users. But we have an example in a second that shows us how we can use that. And even just something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. We can start to generate this same information that we can start to share out to users. You can put it onto SharePoint, for example, and different people can come in and see that information. So if we come back into our tool here, we'll see the APIs pushed that up nicely and all that information is generated there for us. And again, we've got our kind of structures, all of our field information. And again, we didn't have to do anything. Once we've got that workspace, we can just let that loose on our different data sets and it will go through and automatically populate all of that. And that's really what FME brings to the whole process. Let's say if we just move on, and then we've got, amazing, but we can make that even easier. And one of the beauties of FME is that it's got its own open API transformer now. So if we want to bring in API, in the past, we go and use the HTTP caller, we'd scroll through the documentation, try and find out what all the different calls meant. That's quite cumbersome. If your platform has an open API specification, and if you're using data virtualization, you get one out of the box. So that's a fantastic capability just there natively you get with FME Flow. So we're looking at trying to do this with our DataGalaxy platform. We dug around. Turns out they have a nice API documentation, and luckily it follows the open API specification. So we can use the open API connector, plug that in, and then we can start to not even have to trawl through the documentation in a particularly complex way, but we can actually then start to actually use the open API transformer to generate that data. So we should have a quick video here. So we can add in our open API caller transformer. We can go into there and then we can come in, we can select the open API specification. So from there, we just downloaded from our platform the little JSON file, and you can instantly see all the different methods and things that are available that we can start to work with. So it's a really, really quick way of actually starting to work with integrations. Don't need security for this one because we've got done through the header. So we just put that into our header file here as an authorization one. And then I'm going to blue P to this one and just paste that in. And again, we can start to come in and we can send those test requests as well. So we can start to work through, what do we need to do? Pull that back and we start to see all the information there. So it makes it really, really easy to start to work with some of these platforms. So fantastic for our scenario here, meant we could really easily start to pull that data through, but really, really quick to start to work with different API platforms and understand them. And so if we just move on, what we can do is, okay, that's fine if you've got DataGalaxy, but what do you want to do if you're using FME? How can we make this easier just with FME? So, just taking a simple use case to start with of just the data dictionary elements of this. We know that we have the schema from the schema reader, the schema scanner. We can start to really easily pull out these schema features to start to build out some of this kind of governance metadata. And so if we look at this one here, we built a simple workflow where we're reading in some data and we're building out that kind of quality report. So we're looking at the completeness of our data. We're looking at how many unique values we've got. We're looking at checking our geometry to see whether the geometry is valid. Then we can look as we come across at how we can start to bring through things like that feature. So, can we look at the tables? Can we look at the schema? Can we start to generate a glossary from that data as part of the workflow? So, it's not a particularly exciting output. It's going to be an Excel file, but it's very, very easy to build that out with those FME tools. And we'll end up with the kind of reports here. So we can get our table names coming out. We can start to look at the schema that goes against it. We can check that all the data is valid there as part of this as well. But also we can start to drill into that quality question. Is our data going to meet the specifications that we want? If I start to look at this and I'm building out a dashboard or a report based on this particular field, am I getting the right information from there? And equally, it's Excel, so anybody in the organization can come in and start to add their own records to this. They can come in and mark them up if they're PPI, for example. Somebody can manually come through and do that. We were talking earlier today about maybe you can start to get AI to do some of these things. So that opens up a whole other round of challenges around data security, data governance, location of your data, etc. But it's starting to get more and more sophisticated. So you can see here, we've just got some simple percentage things to say we've got this many records, it's 5% complete. Is that a particular problem for our data set? Am I going to be concerned about that? Do I need to think about that when I'm doing certain things here? The quality control indicators only 18% complete. That's slightly concerning. If it's supposed to be a quality control metric, then am I going to be confident that that's actually well represented in the data? On the other hand, unsurprisingly, building ID is 100% complete. It's probably a numeric field that's going to be quite easy to populate. So we can see that one coming through and being completed there. So gives us a much better view of our data. And again, just very simple to start to build these kind of process flows out in FME, to start to look at them, start to understand what's going on with our data a little bit. And then you've got all those options about where you want to push that out to. Is it Excel? Is it going to be a shiny dashboard tool? Is it going to be just a simple Word report, or HTML report to go alongside your data? So that's really kind of it, is to say that FME is all you really need to improve your organization's data quality and data governance, or at least it's going to give you a very, very large component of that process. So it's a very, very powerful tool for looking at quality, helping you fix quality, maintain and understand that, and then helping you to build out a lot of the governance type things that go along with it, right down to building out those metadata records as well. So you can still have your traditional metadata alongside those kind of more sophisticated reports around what you're actually generating. So it's very much a case of, we can deliver the data quality. We can start to look at the compliance, which I think is a really big one for a lot of our customers, especially is the data that they're getting in actually meeting the standards they need it to? Because that becomes a huge headache and a huge cost to actually process internally. And if they can push the emphasis back onto the suppliers to ensure that they're supplying the data correctly, that's a huge time saving and therefore a cost saving running that data internally. And again, security, starting to be able to mask out attributes, remove fields from there, understand what fields we've got that maybe contain information that we'd be concerned about. Again, it's hugely important these days as along with this. And a lot of it comes back to being accountable, making sure that you've got those data stewards, that they can run something and they can stand over it and say, we have a process that we can run that's repeatable, that's automatable, that we know is going to give us the reports out of this at the end, that we can start to summarize our data as it comes through. So with that, I'm going to hand that one back to Donald and Elizabeth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gavin, and really appreciate all your time in preparing this webinar. It was wonderful to work with you and the entire IMGS team leading up to today's webinar. We hope the audience also got a lot of great value out of today's webinar. It looks like they have, based on the reactions, and I've seen some great questions already coming in here. Speaking of questions, we will have about 10 minutes, probably a bit more than that actually, remaining at the end here to answer some questions live. So if you do have any more questions top of mind, or you're starting to think about those, do feel free to get those into the questions tab, and we'll be taking a look at those in a few moments here. I've also got Gavin's email on the screen here in case you have any follow-up questions directly for him or about IMGS's amazing services that they offer to FME users. But in the meantime, I will take us through a few concluding and resource slides here. First off, if you are newer to our company, Safe Software, we've been in the data integration game for over 30 years now, helping over 200,000 users worldwide. And FME is also the only all data, any AI platform, all data velocities, locations, types, and any AI technology. So truly offering you that full flexibility. In terms of resources to help you get started today, our team has put together a few here. We have a couple previous webinars that are fantastic on GIS and data governance there. So feel free if you want to check out more, take more of a dive into some more data governance webinars, we've got those linked on the slide, as well as an article on how FME supports data governance across the data life cycle. And data quality transformers, we've got the link there to those, just as a reference. And you can feel free, once again, just to download the deck. On the top right of the PDF, you'll see a button there, and then you can click through those links directly. We're all about free resources at SAFE. We have our academy, which is home to free instructor-led training. And then our webinars as well, I'll highlight. We do have a few new ones posted recently, as well as hundreds on demand. I think I did the math the other day, actually. I think there's over 430 on-demand webinars. So certainly a lot of different topics and a goldmine of information you can search through there. Next steps to take today. We've highlighted IMGS's website there. Feel free to visit that to learn more. And then we also have info@safe.com if you wish to get in touch with us about anything data. And if you're newer to FME, the accelerator is a great place to start. It's 90 minutes free of charge, and it will walk you through all the basics. If you do redeem our community badge codes, we have one for today's webinar as a thank you for joining us. And I will just drop that code in the chat as well. And if you aren't a member of the FME community, certainly give it a look. It's a great place to network with other users alike, FME experts. There's lots of forums there. Someone might have just asked a question that you're wondering yourself. So yeah, it's a great resource. Okay, so with that, I will invite our presenters if they want to join me with their webcams on stage, and we can take a look through the questions tab together. I think we've gotten a couple new ones that have come in, and maybe there's one or two we want to highlight as well that have already been chatted out, but maybe good to bring to the larger stage here.
Yeah, Gavin, maybe if you want to cover Michelle's question. I wouldn't be too familiar with DataGalaxy.
Yeah, I think Bruce has already mentioned that you can pull the data from the ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise side of it. You don't have to necessarily bring it back as a CSV. It can come back as the CSV if you want it to, or if we were populating the DataGalaxy, we'd actually use the API. So a little bit like that demo there, we'd just build the workflow to read ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Enterprise, bring that information, structure that information for DataGalaxy, and then pass that in through the API. You can do it through the CSV. It's just a couple more steps, whereas the API tends to be a little bit cleaner. So that's probably the easiest route. Though he makes the fair point, obviously that's only going to be for your textual information. If you've got images and stuff there as part of that, you'd have to handle those separately.
Awesome. Yeah, any other questions we might want to pick out here?
I was going to say, I think the date one's a good one. That's always a challenge. I think every system is slightly different for dates. Trying to manage and standardize those, I think, comes back more to a business practice, and then testing to make sure your date fits the target you want. I say certainly the date time fields in FME or transformers now are very sophisticated. I can remember the earlier iterations of them, and it was a lot more painful. The new versions are very, very good for this compared to what was there before. So they will help you change that, and you can obviously reformat your dates and things as well. But yeah, a lot of it still comes down to knowing your formats and a little bit of business rules around that one.
Excellent.
I think the same for the dashboard one. It's very much business dependent. I think, as Donald had said there, each organization, each industry probably has different ideas around what's important, what's key, what metrics they want to look at, what KPIs they want to build. And I think that's probably where one of the strengths of FME is that it gives you that flexibility to create lots of different ones for what you need and what your business or your organization actually wants to be able to build those dashboards. So you can kind of agree them, and then you've got the flexibility to build the workflow to meet those kind of KPIs or those indicators for your dashboard.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing. It's just FME can be as flexible as you need it to be as well. So whatever your business or the standards in your field, FME is able to bend towards that.
Awesome. I believe we've gotten to all the questions now, unless Donald or Gavin, you see any outstanding there?
I don't believe so.
No, I think you've got, I say the WMS one's always a good one. So certainly with the new data virtualization stuff to start to build those out, I think there's a lot you can do there to build them. But yeah, those can be a little bit fun. And that is a great article. I've used that one in the past to look at those sorts of problems. So
yeah, I should also mention that this is more so done through FME flow as well, rather than FME form.
Awesome. Okay. Well, fantastic. We do have a few more minutes. So if you do have any more questions that come to mind, we'll leave things running for a few more minutes. Feel free to get those into the questions tab, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on those on the back end. But in the meantime, huge thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time once again. If you do have a moment to fill out our webinar survey, I just dropped the link in the chat. We really appreciate any feedback. It helps us continually improve our program. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks again to Gavin and Donald and the IMGS team.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks, Gavin.
yeah, thank you, Rich, and thanks for organizing and inviting us.
Yeah, our pleasure. Awesome. Bye for now, everyone.
Yep.